3:30 and tonight is 7:30.
This time I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Mars Colder's husband, Dr. William Bulger, and his daughter Ann. If you please stand. Thank you for being with us this evening. Glad you could make it. As representative of the Sport Administration Program at Central, I would also like to thank the College of Health Professions, Dean Kopp, as well as the Vending Fund Committee, who without their support, this would not be possible. So we thank them. And without further ado, since 1971, this man has been covering the world of politics, business, and sports. As an owner of Sports News Syndication, a full-service radio and television company in New York City, his clients include the John Madden Sports Quiz and Calendar Show, USA and ABC Radio News Network. He's also won 2 Associated Press Awards for news coverage, and this evening he'll be covering the question, will competitive balance in professional sports survive the current future economic marketplace? On behalf of the Department of Physical Education and Sport, please help me in welcoming Dr. Evan Moon.
I can be the doctor if you want me to. I saw some of you before. Welcome again. Thanks for having me here. I'm having a great time here. Really nice campus, and I really have enjoyed Dr. Schneider bringing me around, introducing me to everybody, and had a really pleasant time, and I want to thank you for your hospitality. I'm talking about sports, big business now. Big business on college, big business in the pros. I'm going to basically stick to the pros. I'm not going to be talking about college. And I'm going to be talking about 3 tenets of sports, which includes stadiums, television, and government. And the 4th is fans, but we forget about fans because sports owners forget about fans. Fans really don't count. Besides, you probably couldn't afford more than 3 or 4 days at the ballpark if you did everything right, and they don't care. Sports is a big business. It's not your father's leisure and recreation activity anymore. Box seats in the baseball game, they may have cost about $3.50 at one time a generation ago, and hot dogs may have cost 25 cents, and a Coca-Cola or other soda, also a quarter, but it's not like that anymore. Roy Malarkar, you probably haven't heard the name Roy Malarkar, but Roy Malarkar is the CEO of the Ottawa Senators, a hockey team that could win the Stanley Cup this year. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they were a joke. Just last week, the Senators announced a series of ticket price increases for the 1999-2000 season. The average increase is going to be between 11 and 14%. Last year, they raised it 10% across the board. Now, Malarkar didn't sugarcoat anything. He says there is a reason for the increase. And he gave a pretty good analogy. He says, this isn't like selling heads of lettuce here, where you can get a better deal at the next grocer. We're the only major league sport in Ottawa, and we have to raise our prices to remain competitive. And the Ottawa Senators, despite having a good team, despite selling out most of their luxury boxes, despite having a lot of people in the stands, are struggling. And they may move to United States City after the 1999-2000 season, unless they continue to sell all of their luxury boxes and get significant tax breaks from the Canadian Parliament in the province of Ontario. What they want is what United States cities and states have to offer, numerous tax breaks and incentives, and if they don't get them, they will join the Winnipeg Jets, who fled to Phoenix, and the Quebec Nordiques, who went to Denver and fleeing Canada. How many of you go to Red Wing games? I see somebody with a Red Wing shirt that says Stanley Cup champions. It's 98, so it's fresh. How many go to hockey games over at Joe Louis Arena? Bunch. What do you pay? What do you pay for a ticket? Well, if you pay, what do you pay? All right. The average hockey ticket in the United States is $41.40. It's going to increase during the playoffs, sometimes twofold, sometimes threefold. But ticket revenues in the National Hockey League aren't making it anymore. The average team revenue, 70% of what they get out of tickets and television goes to player salaries. And Canadian teams want tax breaks now or they can't survive. American teams, of course, in all sports want tax breaks. And what makes the problem more difficult for Ottawa and for Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver is the difference in the value of the dollar. Canadian teams have to spend $1.52 to buy an American dollar. So that puts them behind the 8 ball immediately. They get fewer tax breaks than American teams. Now, the Ottawa Senators paid for an interchange to get their cars into their arena in Kanata, Ontario. They paid a lot of money to build that interchange. In Washington, Jack Kent Cooke paid for his football stadium. He did build the new park, Jack Kent Cooke Stadium in Landover, Maryland. But Maryland officials upgraded all the existing infrastructure. They put in the roads, they put in the highways, they put in the byways to get in and out of the stadium. Canadian citizens and the Canadian Parliament are now debating whether or not to change tax laws for teams, after the Mills Commission recommended they do that. Now, taxpayers build stadiums for owners, and owners pay almost no rent in the United States, yet collect the lion's share from the facility. That doesn't happen in Canada. And Canadians are worried that the 5 NHL franchises, or rather the 6 NHL franchises that are left there may go, and only Toronto and Montreal will survive. Montreal Expos are hanging by a thread, and last night the Toronto Blue Jays only drew 23,000 people to the Sky Dome. The Blue Jays may also be for sale. Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies in the NBA seem to be okay right now. Seem is the key word there. Have you ever thought, how much does a professional team or a college team really add to a community? Now, I'm going to eliminate college from this discussion. How much does a professional team add to a community? Do you have any idea? It'll startle you to find out how little it adds to a community, but we'll get to that. We've always been conditioned that sports is an essential element in American life. Baseball has been woven into the tapestry of this country by poets, writers, historians, in songs, in books, in movies. You know, the Pride of the Yankees, the Lou Gehrig story, all the way up to the Bad News Bears. In New England, poets, okay, let's start that again. In New England, poets really talk about the Boston Red Sox as if they are a deity. Babe Ruth once said he made more money than President Hoover back in 1928, 29, 1930, and said, why shouldn't I? I had a better year than Hoover. But do sports teams really have much of an impact other than performing some high-scale entertainment to a small segment of the population? Now, I picked on Nashville earlier today. I'm going to pick on Nashville again because they have a football team and a hockey team all of a sudden in the last year and a half. They spent $500 million, that's a billion with a B, $500 million for facilities for a hockey team and a football team. In January of 1997, I did a TV show with the mayor of Nashville, Phil Bredesen, who's still the mayor of the city. During that interview, he did something most politicians would never do. He told the truth. Bredesen admitted there was no way his city, Nashville, would ever recover its investment in the 2 sports facilities, which brought the 2 teams in there. Nashville residents are paying higher property taxes, and they're paying higher water taxes for the privilege of having the NHL Predators and for getting the Houston Oilers to relocate to the banks of the Cumberland River. Now, the Cumberland River plays an important part in this, and I'll tell you why in a second. Bredesen is hoping that having a hockey team and a football team will bring attention to the city in the Mid-South and on ABC Monday Night Football or ESPN Sunday Night Football. He is hoping that the stadium on the banks of the Cumberland River, which face the Nashville skyline, the city will be able to have its Nashville skyline shown off. Of course, Bob Dylan recorded an album years ago called The Nashville Skyline. And people who follow music or the country music industry know that it's the world capital of country music. But no matter the president, who is from New Jersey, who has a degree in Harvard, and is not a sports fan, that didn't matter to him at all. For $500 million of taxpayers' money and a guaranteed profit for the hockey team, the Nashville Predators are guaranteed a $20 million profit a year. He has bought his city big league status. You could read in the New York Times when the New York Rangers or the New York Islanders or the New Jersey Devils play the Nashville Predators, you'll see the little byline, Nashville. If the New York Jets play the Titans, the Tennessee Titans, you're going to see that little byline. $500 million He has bought some space in the New York Times, which was his objective. But does sports really pay? Some of you are going to be planners in the future. Planners in Charlotte, North Carolina, say this: the National Football League expansion team that came there in 1995 brought in some entertainment, but not one Fortune 500 company moved to Charlotte because there was a football team in the city. Not one answered a questionnaire saying, did the Charlotte or Carolina Panthers improve life in the city? They have a football team now. Yet cities are clamoring to keep teams or attract new teams by offering owners virtually rent-free and tax-free facilities. I live in New York. I cover sports in New York. I cover news in New York. Sports and news are one and the same now. Over the years, I have covered the San Francisco Giants attempting to move to Tampa and have the mayor, Frank Jordan, beg to keep the Giants in San Francisco. I have met governors. I have met senators. I have met mayors. Half of Clinton's cabinet came through New York in the 1980s trying to get NFL teams in San Antonio or Major League Baseball teams in Denver or football in St. Louis. They all come to New York. I get to talk to all of them. In New York, we have two older stadiums. We have Yankee Stadium and we have Shea Stadium. Yankee Stadium is 76 years old now. Shea Stadium is 35 years old and is a rundown dump. Now, the city is trying to figure out, this is a city that has Broadway. It has every conceivable form of restaurant and entertainment throughout its borders. And if you're tired of the city, you just go to the suburbs, and there's more and more and more. There are 20 million people living in the area. If the Yankees went away or the Mets went away, they probably wouldn't be missed that much, because if you look at the Yankees and Mets combined attendance, it's no better than 5 million people in an area that draws 20 million people. So the big question right now is, should New York City build George Steinbrenner a new ballpark on the heavily congested west side of Manhattan or renovate Yankee Stadium? Now, Steinbrenner is open to stay at Yankee Stadium beyond 2002 because he knows New Jersey's not going to build him a stadium, and he knows there's too much political opposition to build a stadium on the west side of Manhattan. The stadium that George wants will cost at least $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion with a B, and the taxpayers will have to pay for it. Now, the stadium he wants, there's a little problem with it. It's built, or it would be built on the top of a toxic dump, because the Long Island Railroad's trains sit there overnight, and the diesel seeps into the ground, the diesel fuel. So they'd have to clean that up. So it might be about $35 million to cap it. So they got to clean that up. And then they still need a place for the trains. So the trains would stay there. They would have to spend $500 million just building a platform on top of 30th and 32nd Street between 11th and 12th Avenue, just building a cement platform to hold a stadium. Now, this stadium that George wants would have a magnificent view of the World Trade Center to the south and the Empire State Building to the east. $1.5 billion, that's before you factor in the interest on the bonds. This thing would cost about $2.3 billion and probably would end up in the courts for years and years because the environmentalists would block it. So George knows that he's not going to get that stadium on the west side. But the Mets are also looking for a stadium. Okay, you're talking $2 billion for the Yankees. What about the Mets? Well, you're talking about another $1 billion over there. And they're only entitled, if you're going to do for one, you've got to do for the other. Steinbrenner probably would have a more difficult time getting a stadium in New York. He does no business in New York except the Yankees. The Mets owner, Fred Wilpon's a real estate developer in New York. Right now, New York City has school problems. The school system is falling apart. Giuliani also wants to bring, Mayor Giuliani, Rudolph Giuliani, wants to bring the Jets back. If he can't bring the Yankees to the west side, he'll bring the Jets back to the west side, or move Madison Square Garden from 7th Avenue and 30th and 31st and 33rd Street over to 11th Avenue and 32nd and 30th Street. Giuliani, who's going to be running for Senate next year, wants to leave his mark, and he's going to do it in a big way, bring stadiums to New York City. He's a big Yankee fan, Giuliani, and he'll do anything for George Steinbrenner. Now, as I develop this speech, you're going to see there are three essential elements in having a successful pro sports franchise: government assistance, new stadium, and a new TV contract. Steinbrenner has 2 of the 3. The Yankees start with $55 million in the bank from cable TV monies. They get it from the Madison Square Garden network, and now the story gets really complicated. This is where sports is headed. The big money from sports will come from TV, and it's going to come out of Rupert Murdoch's pocket if he wants to. Now, Madison Square Garden's minority owner is Rupert Murdoch, who happens to own the Los Angeles Dodgers. Last week, Murdoch just bought out Liberty Cable, or Liberty Media, and that increased his ownership stakes in the New York Knicks, the New York Rangers, and the Staples Center in Los Angeles. That means he has a percentage of ownership with the Lakers, the Kings, the Knicks, and the Rangers. He can control two teams and the money flow for two teams. Murdoch controls the television revenue flows of most Major League Baseball teams, most National Hockey League teams, and most National Basketball Association teams through the Fox Sports Network, which you probably get here, the Detroit version of it, and a coalition of various local regional sports networks. This makes for some very, very interesting conflicts in the sports world, and in the entertainment world, and in the world of politics. And that's what sports is all about today. As I said, there are a couple of ingredients that you need to have a successful team. Murdoch has the ability to create or break teams. And I'll give you an example, and I will read it to you slowly because it gets very complicated. 1997, the New York Rangers signed Colorado Avalanche center Joe Sakic to an offer sheet. Colorado had 15 days to match the offer, or he was going to be with the Rangers. At that time, and still for the next few weeks, the Avalanche are owned by Ascent Communications. The Rangers by a conglomerate that includes Charles Dolan, who runs Cablevision, Murdoch, John Malone for the time being, even though Murdoch just bought out John Malone and his Liberty TCI Media. Malone's company happened to be had its headquarters in Denver, Englewood, Colorado, which is a suburb. It gets even more complicated than this. Rupert Murdoch owns the New York Post. One of his columnists, Jay Greenberg, who writes for the Post, said the Ranger fans, New York Ranger fans, should boycott the movie Air Force One. People heard of the movie Air Force One? Came out in 1997. Because Air Force One was produced by Ascent, owner of the Colorado Avalanche. Have I confused anybody yet? Because here it comes. Greenberg wrote that by not seeing, New York fans, by not seeing Air Force One, that would mean less money for Ascent to match the Rangers' offer sheet. However, what Greenberg failed to point out in his article, or realize that without Sakic, Colorado fans might tune out the local Sportsnet affiliate or forget to subscribe to TCI Cable, which are co-partners with the New York Rangers. And TCI is very prominent in the Denver area. Fox and TCI through Liberty were prime movers in the Ranger ownership and prime movers in the Colorado Avalanche ownership. In the end, Colorado re-signed Joe Sakic. Have I lost you yet? Because I think Gary Bettman was lost in the NHL while this was all going on. Okay, so Sakic signs with the Avalanche, and they were able to do it, even though they were broke, or said they were broke at the time, with an assist from the Regional Sports Network, which was owned by Fox and John Malone, partners in the New York Rangers. So the corporate decision was made. Having a stronger hockey team in Denver was more important than having a stronger hockey team in New York, because New York Ranger fans are going to tune into Madison Square Garden, which Malone and Murdoch partly owned. And in Denver, they weren't sure that the Denver fans would watch a bad hockey team if Sakic wasn't there. They owned the TV station there. So Fox and Malone kicked in the money, got some ownership at the new Pepsi Center there in exchange for the extra money, and Joe Sakic remained a Colorado Avalanche player. That is where sports is headed these days. That is the example. Now, did you understand? Sakic stays with Colorado, even though he signs contracts with people, with the Rangers, and with the Colorado Avalanche, who are funded by the same person, the same people. That's how tangled sports is today. And television is the prime mover in sports. National Football League lives off television revenues. They couldn't make it on the revenues just from the stadium. And they get revenues from Murdoch, the Fox network, Disney with the combined ABC and ESPN entry, and Mel Karmazin, CBS, Westwood One radio network and TV network, or whatever he's calling his conglomerate these days. He may still be calling it Westinghouse, but he owns a whole bunch of things. The NFL is getting $18 billion, with a B, $18 billion over an 8-year period, which started last year from CBS, Fox, ABC, ESPN. Starting this fall, the National Hockey League, which has abysmal national ratings, switches from Murdoch's Fox network to Disney's ABC. Disney, which owns NHL member Anaheim, now you can see where this is all headed. All these TV people own sports teams. That is where it's headed for the future, or it's there already. Anyway, the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, to be more precise, more than double the old Fox deal, giving the NHL a 5-year, $400 million contract. Now that's chicken feed compared to the NFL, but it's better than 5 years ago when the NHL got virtually nothing for TV. And it's also a product of the fact that Michael Eisner and Rupert Murdoch hate one another. And they will go to battle anywhere. And whoever is the last man standing wins. National Basketball Association doesn't deal on the national level with either Eisner or Murdoch. They locked out their players this year in an attempt to stem rising player salaries, get control of costs. And they came up with a tighter salary cap than they had, and it almost, not quite, almost guarantees ownership cost certainty. The owners were able to outlast the players because of TV. The NBA signed a $2.46 billion contract that ends in 2002 with NBC and Ted Turner Sports. Now, Ted Turner is an owner of a team in the NBA, the Atlanta Hawks, so it goes in one pocket and out the other pocket. His fellow 28 owners were guaranteed $465 million through their new deal this year, regardless of whether or not a ball was tipped off in the NBA because of the lockout or not. There will be no rebates. Apparently NBC and TNT or Ted Turner are happy that they got back and they hardly lost any games. Major League Baseball, they get $1.7 billion in national TV contracts from their partners, Rupert Murdoch, Michael Eisner, and NBC. Murdoch with Fox, Fox Sports Net, Disney with ESPN and NBC, who I think is doing the World Series this year. In fact, I know they're doing the World Series this year. So TV is where the action starts for these teams, and whether the discrepancy, and where the discrepancy starts between small market and large market, and the ability for teams to pay the ever-increasing salaries. Major League Baseball, how many of you Tiger fans here? Tigers have a chance to compete this year? No, they don't. They don't have the stadium or the TV for it. And what I'm going to get to is Major League Baseball, very shortly, may resemble the British Football League, where bottom teams drop into a second division and the top teams in the second division move on up into the first division. The average baseball player now makes $1.7 million a year. 1.7. That's up 19.3% over last year. You tell me how many businesses can survive with the inflation rate of 19.3% and why we're headed for another baseball showdown in 2002. As sure as I'm standing here, there will be no baseball played at some point in 2002. You can mark my words on that. World champion New York Yankees pay their players $85 million, $85.1 million. That's their payroll. The average Yankee player makes more than $3 million a year. Of course, you factor in Bernie Williams' contract and you offset it to, say, Cliff Bellinger's contract, and you understand the average really isn't the average. Bellinger is making about $150,000 a year. Yankees payroll, 5.5 times that of the Montreal Expos. So how can the Yankees pay all this money, and the Expos can, and the Twins can, and the Tigers don't or won't, although they did pay Dean Palmer all that money? It goes back to television. Yankees start out with $55 million a year in the bank. They get it from Murdoch and Chuck Dole. The Twins get $2 million. There's no real revenue sharing in baseball. Oh, you know, there's 25 cents a ticket in the National League, and I think 30 cents a ticket in the American League, but that's meal money these days. Some teams like the Yankees and the Orioles and the Indians pay a token luxury tax, which really doesn't amount to much. Because of television monies, baseball has become a two-tiered or even a three-tiered sport, you could argue. Large cities, New York and Los Angeles, have huge television contracts, although the Mets are unhappy with Murdoch's Fox Sports Network because they signed a deal with Chuck Dolan before he was Murdoch's partner, a long-term deal in the mid-'80s that really hasn't kept up with the baseball inflation. Stein Brothers' deal ends in 2001. His bidding will start probably at $70 million a year. Murdoch should be bidding. Ted Turner should be bidding with Time Warner. Locally, Time Warner is a big cable company in New York. And Michael Eisner and Disney are expected to try to form ESPN East. They tried to form ESPN West out in Los Angeles and couldn't do it. But this is another city, and it is the New York Yankees. Dolan, and this gets confusing because Dolan's Murdoch's partner in some ventures, and he's not Murdoch's partner in other ventures. Chuck Dolan, who owns Cablevision and Madison Square Garden, he is Murdoch's Cablevision partner, attempted to buy the Yankees before George Steinbrenner entered into a deal to merge the Yankees with the New Jersey Nets. Now, the reason that they merged was that both the Nets and Yankees have TV contracts that are coming up very shortly, and combined, their clout could be enough to start a regional sports network because you'd have year-round programming. And you would have Ted Turner very interested, and Michael Eisner interested, and of course Murdoch interested, and Dolan. Confused yet? Am I clear, or are you confused? Because baseball, hockey, and basketball are thoroughly confused by all this. So if you understand what's going on, you're ahead of the game because they don't know what's going on in New York. So Dolan can't buy the Yankees. He wants to buy the Yankees for $600 million. George enters into this deal. Now Chuck Dolan says, well, if I can't buy the Yankees, I might as well buy the Mets because I distribute their games. So why should I be paying them a rights fee when I don't have to? And I could keep it in my pocket and give them whatever I feel like giving them and keep the taxes away from the government. So Dolan figures it's cheaper to own a team, and he folds it into his enterprises the way the Knicks and the Rangers are because he owns Madison Square Garden. Right now, that's up in the air. Dolan may buy the Mets, may not buy the Mets, but the Mets owners don't talk to each other. Nelson Doubleday and Fred Wilpon hate each other, so it may be impossible for him to broker a deal right now. This is how sports is going today, and this is why the Detroit Tigers are in Detroit, and why the Mets are in New York, and the Yankees are in New York, and the Dodgers are where they are in LA. Television is wagging the dog, and baseball's payrolls reflect that. The Yankees are paying the most. Murdoch's Dodgers are second at $79.2 million a year. Baltimore, which is not a major market, but squeezes every nickel they can out of Camden Yards, they're third at $78.5 million. Texas Rangers have a new stadium and an upcoming media mogul by the name of Thomas O. Hicks. Now, Hicks wants to build a regional sports network down in the Dallas Metroplex and throughout Texas and Oklahoma based on the model that Madison Square Garden has or Comcast in Philadelphia. Guess who Hicks is talking to? Want to guess? Rupert Murdoch, Michael Eisner, and Ted Turner. Three names that will continue coming up in this conversation. Ted Turner's Atlanta Braves are fifth. The Braves have the new stadium and all the revenues from it, the stadium that they used in the Olympics. TBS is their distributor. Dolan looks at Murdoch, he looks at Turner with envy, perhaps, because that is what he wants to be. Cleveland Indians round out the top six. The Cleveland Indians used to be baseball's poster child of fiscal illness. I'm getting laughter out of that. Why is that? But they used to be, sick franchise, open the dictionary, there was Chief Wahoo. Now they sell out all of their games by February of each year, and they can spend with the big guys. Murdoch's going to make or break teams in the future. He controls 19 of the 23 regional sports networks in the United States, and his company will assign rights fees. Toronto and Montreal are out. All the Canadian teams are out. Turner and San Diego owner John Morris opposed Murdoch's bid to buy the Dodgers, thinking that Murdoch would outspend everyone in pursuit of making his Dodgers a strong TV product, not only in Los Angeles, but in Asia, where he owns all the TV. Every place from Israel to North Korea and the other way, Rupert Murdoch supplies the TV programming down to Australia. Didn't take long for John Morris to find out about Rupert Murdoch. Murdoch gave Moore's best pitcher, Kevin Brown, a 7-year, $105 million deal. $15 million a year. John Morris couldn't match that. Kevin Brown's now a Los Angeles Dodger. Murdoch's obsessed with American sports, but remember, he is an Australian who had Congress make him an American citizen, so he can own television stations in the United States. British government officials are less than enthusiastic of his proposed purchase of Manchester United in the British Football League. In fact, last Friday, the